in Israel and saying that Netanyahu does not want a two-state solution. He wants to push the Palestinians out, and he wants their domination, and he was very critical of it. That a head of the Mossad actually said, because former head of the Mossad, there are a lot of intelligence people in Israel who realize that if Israel or the United States bombs Iran, there's a much bigger war in the Middle East. It'll last for quite a while. There's one power in the Middle East that definably does have nuclear weapons. It's Israel. There's also one power in the Middle East which is quite crazy. I mean, Iran is crazy, but they haven't aggressed against anybody. But Israel is actually, I was shocked, I'll just say. I'll describe some of it to you. Maybe I can make some of my shock apparent to you. I'll just say that I'm a Jew who's fought against Nazis and fascism and racism all my life. So I know ghettos when I see them. And I identify with people who fight against ghettos, and I don't identify with people who impose them. So when I looked around there, I saw the Palestinians, and I said, gee whiz, these must be the Jews of the occupied territories. And the people who run the place, I couldn't figure out at all. Except they had a lot of guns. They had a lot of kids with a lot of guns everywhere. So you might think that it's a nice little democracy, but to the extent it's a democracy for Jews. And in Haaretz, they just had a study which said, an opinion poll, and Gideon Levy wrote about it very eloquently. Turns out 58% of Jews think that Israel practices apartheid now, and if they annex the occupied territories, they should practice apartheid. There should be no votes for Palestinians. The apartheid it practices now is partial. Palestinian Israelis do get to vote. They are discriminated against, but they do get to vote. So anyway, this head of the Mossad, former head of the Mossad, pointed out that Obama had done a courageous thing in resisting bombing Iran. And I wrote a book called Must Global Politics Constrain Democracy, which makes the point that political leaders in the United States wage wars in other places and intervene in order to get themselves elected. It's one of the few findings of political science, quote unquote, which actually is a serious statistical finding. Wars go up in years of presidential elections and interventions. And if you ask the cause of them is rally around the flag and crush reform, usually. Johnson escalated in Vietnam because he was afraid to lose the war. He didn't think he had a chance to win, and he didn't think he was doing anything good. He escalated. My friend George Downs, who's a fine political scientist at NYU, wrote a mathematical paper on this called Gambling for Resurrection on the escalation. And I incorporated it in my book because it fit the theme very well. Now, Obama having taken out Osama bin Laden, not using drones, and then under the advice of the Democratic neocons, peppering civilians in Pakistan and blowing them up, and Yemen and Somalia with drones, and perhaps getting some bad guys, whoever they might be. I'll just say, if you think American intelligence is so good on these matters, you might want to think again. But it is true, that Obama competently took out, without drones, bin Laden. So he was able to stand up on this issue, going along with or encouraging all of the Joint Chiefs and the intelligence people to say, you know, this is crazy. This is crazy. You know, we already had 2 losing wars, and now we're going to do this, right? Americans are so enthusiastic to march. So that's a pretty big difference. I don't think Obama, who has punished Iran fiercely with the boycott, will be completely unlikely to go to war with Iran, although I think it's doubtful that he will if he didn't during the electoral season. But I think it takes a movement to change this. But I have a certain respect for Obama in this regard. The other thing is that I listened to the foreign policy debate at 3 in the morning with my friend Jim Turner from Cornell. And there were Romney and Obama talking about who could be the greatest enthusiast for giving Israel every weapon that they could possibly want. Andrew Sullivan said, and to his credit, there was no mention of the settlements. There was none. But I seem to remember that Obama made this an issue, and it happened that some of my colleagues on the trip, I didn't, went to speak with a settler named David Wilder in Hebron, who's from New Jersey. And David has a tzitzis, which are Jewish strings, and he has a Glock, which he just carries around with him, which meant that they didn't feel so good sitting with him, because, a guy who has a Glock, you might not feel you really wanted to have it out with him, not that. Glock. Yeah, he is Glock. This fellow wanted Romney. There is a passion for Romney on the right in Israel, which is most of the political spectrum at this point, mainstream. So, aside from that he might take away medical care, that he might smash Social Security, that he might give all of this to Wall Street, that this represents a real transformation in American politics. So if one says, I much prefer Jill Stein, which I do as a person, who actually said, they didn't mention Palestine, which seemed like a good point. But I'll just say that this is a pretty big choice. And it is by no means clear that Obama will win. There are a number of polls, one of which is Republican, but the other which is Gallup, which seems to show that Romney's going to win. If Romney has a 4-point margin, he will probably carry some states which appear to be in Obama's column. So my own view of the matter is that anybody who cares about keeping the possibility of having a decent society here without revolution, which I'm all in favor of revolution, by the way. So, you won't get an argument with me. If you want to have nonviolent revolution, I'm all for it. And I think that movements like Occupy, and it will take a huge movement to do something about Palestine. The way that Palestine has been buried in the American consciousness is worse than the wall which they have built, which separates it from the consciousness of many Israeli Jews, who act as if it's a nice day at the beach in Tel Aviv. I was with one Palestinian man who made the film Broken Cameras. He made the film Broken Cameras because his cameras were broken 5 times. He got shot up every time. They stitched him up. And once they had to take him to Tel Aviv because they hurt him so badly. So he got permission to take his 2 boys to the sea. Because although it's only 35 kilometers from Tel Aviv, where he lives, he has never gone to the sea. And they have never gone to the sea. And they are not allowed to go to the sea. So I don't think the election of Obama will mean that America will deal with this problem, although I'm rather happy with the fact that Netanyahu really doesn't like Obama, and that Obama timidly pushed for doing something about the settlements. And I think we ought to push Obama, when he's reelected, to do more things about the settlements. And if we're talking about Romney, we'll deal with the problem of a larger war in the Middle East pretty well immediately, along with a whole lot of other problems. So which of the many things we will deal with then, I think, is the question. The Obama campaign is asking all of us to vote early. And I'm going to make an effort, actually, to do that, which I don't usually do, and to tell people about it. And I would urge everybody here to do the same. And anybody you can think of to get out to vote. Because no kidding, this is like, I don't know, FDR Hoover? I mean, it's pretty serious. This is a transition point. And if we make the transition which Romney Ryan represents, it will be very hard ever to go back. That's aside from the issue of the Supreme Court, which, if you want, on Talking Points Memo, they have a pretty good article today about they're not conservatives, reactionaries who hate the rule of law, who are a lot of lawyers in this country who can't stand habeas corpus and like to torture people and don't like black people voting and are considering on the current court getting rid of the Civil Rights Act, because why do we need it? What's the discrimination against black people now? They say everything they have ever wanted will be done by a Romney court, because probably Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to retire because she's not well. And 4 years of Romney is 4 too many. And we'll have to see. But I think the other leading candidate is also one of the Democrats, more or less. They're not Democrats. I mean, who knows what these words mean. But I mean, one of the people who sort of likes the rule of law, one of the moderates on the Supreme Court, one of the people who thinks people shouldn't be thrown away and tortured by America, something like that. Okay, now, to get into Palestine, I want to start with my book, Black Patriots and Loyalists. And I want to compare the founding myth of America with the founding myth of Israel, because they're really very alike. The founding myth of America is the founding fathers are really a bunch of guys who were terribly concerned about the persecution of religious people, because that's why they came over to the U.S., and they wanted liberty, and they didn't want to pay taxes to people without representation, so they wanted the right to vote. You know, sort of like the Civil Rights Movement, sort of like the kind of thing that the Supreme Court would, and all the voter suppression movements try to take away. And one is taught to idealize them and to hear about the Bill of Rights and so on and so forth, which the Bill of Rights is pretty good. And the fact that the American Revolution practiced slavery, pretty against freedom. It was the first independence movement, but it had slavery. And, you know, there were a lot of people, actually, including a guy at Brown, Gordon Wood, who says, oh, the concern with slaves is an anachronism. People are now upset about racism. But who was upset about racism then? Who was? And if you want to say this is a view influenced by racism, that would be true. And if you look at America now, it's so anti-racist that we have 2.3 million people in prison, 25% of the world's prisoners, about half of them be black, about half of them be in for marijuana possession. We got a lot of racism here. But it turns out, I went into this for about 16 years, that black people had a whole point of view in the American Revolution, and poor whites did too. And that the American Revolution actually was profoundly about slavery. And the best thing that happened in the American Revolution was there was gradual emancipation in all the northern states. And why did that come about? Well, it came about partly because some Christians got very upset about slavery during the time and said with Samuel Hopkins of Rhode Island, it's a sin of crimson dye, and every time the British defeat us, it's because we practice slavery. But the heart of the movement were sailors and artisans, white and black. And in the 1750s, the sailors went to the Caribbean, where there were 20 slave revolts between 1750 and 1770. And they carried the word of this back to London and Boston in 1760 and 1764 because sailors were, for the most part, seized by the British. They were impressed. And the gangs with which the British did it were called press gangs. So if you survived, you know, they said, go up, climb up the mast. And if you didn't fall off, there you were, right? So you got to sail the seven seas, but you didn't feel too good about it. So they identified with the slaves. They didn't identify with the British. They didn't identify with the slave owners. So a guy named Fillmore in London wrote a very powerful pamphlet called Two Dialogues Concerning the Man Trade. And in 1764, James Otis, a great American revolutionary, wrote, the rights of the British colonists asserted